Thanks, everybody. Does the sound all right? You haven't got any feedback between two? No, good. Okay. Thank you very much, Marta, for that warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank Dermot, wherever he is, and all the team for making it possible for me to be here. Dermot, when he asked me to speak on this panel, asked if I could talk about innovation in developing countries. And I suggest I'd love to do that, except that I think in the procurement systems in developing countries there isn't enough of it. So I'm going to focus on some of the challenges, and actually there's some of the questions that Miriam raised. And I'm also going to pick up on a couple of things that Gio talked about in his presentation. I haven't got any slides, but I want to show you a book that inspired me some time ago called The Bright Continent. I heard the author, and I'm sorry, because my language skills are pretty bad in this, Dayo Alopede, I've probably pronounced completely wrongly. She gave a talk at the London School of Economics, which is actually available as a podcast, about innovation and things that were going on in Africa. Nothing to do with public procurement. But what she actually was talking about was some of the problems in getting these innovative solutions into the public procurement sphere. And for those of you who were here earlier in the week, I'd like to echo what Gio said. I came right at the beginning of the week, and this isn't the usual suspects talking about the usual issues to the same people in nice places, which is what my life normally is. I met some really, really interesting, very young entrepreneurs and innovators with some very, very interesting solutions to problems I didn't even know existed. And I think this is one of the key things. We think quite a lot about innovation, and we've seen the companies and the innovators here in the West. And we're used to thinking about innovation in the West. But what this book showed me was some of the things that are going on in Africa in particular. Now, Dayo is a Nigerian-American journalist, and she spends a lot of time in Africa. And she was talking about some really interesting workarounds from informal entrepreneurs, and they're all informal, which is the first issue. They wouldn't even be considered. No matter what your selection criteria are, you will never get an informal entrepreneur. But what have these people done? Apart from the M-Pesa, which is the mobile money transfer system in Kenya and East Africa, they developed also in Kenya a special SMS system that allowed basically the use of sort of cloud texting, which is something I don't understand. But anyway, they allowed messages to go out when there were elections some years ago in Kenya, which led to a lot of violence. And it was an automated thing saying where the violence was. So it would allow people to keep away, allowed the police to get there. It was very quick. It was fantastic. Nobody designed that. It's sprung up. In Somalia, which, let's face it, is known as a bit of a basket case in many cases, they came up with a thing called Dahabsil money transfer, completely outside the formal sector, really effective, and has helped Mogadishu actually get going, because funds can be remitted from overseas because basically they're blacklisted on the proper international financial markets. And in Kenya as well, they came up with a system to replace what's called the flying toilet. Many of you will know what that is. For those of you who don't, basically it's plastic bags being thrown everywhere because there's no proper sanitation facilities. And what they did in Kenya was they got these put in a central place and created a biodigester, just using these things. And that biodigester now powers showers for 400 residents. It's become, and there's proper sanitation facilities, it's become a community thing. It's cost almost nothing. Almost nothing. And what do these things have in common? They didn't come from the public sector. They came from the private sector. And they would never, ever feature in your traditional public procurement, no matter how flexible your system might be. Also, the World Bank has been recognising this, and I work for the UN and I work with the World Bank, as Marta said. And they've come up with a concept supported by the French government, the Conseil d'État and the Agence Française for Development, and they're trying to come up to support what they call small-scale PPPs. They're not really PPPs, but anyway, they call them small-scale PPPs. And in Brazil, they focused on transport. In some parts of Africa, including Tome, they've looked at wastewater collection, which the national government or the local government simply was not providing in terms of public service. So little innovative suppliers got together And they were basically charging the residents, but the residents were happy to pay because they were suddenly getting services that didn't exist previously. And the governments wanted to scale these up, and the French government and the World Bank are looking to support them. And here we hit the major problem, something that Gio spoke about. If you go to the World Bank's website, it's not a criticism of the World Bank, it has to do these things. The paperwork required for one of these small-scale PPPs, that they call them, they're sometimes procurement, sometimes concessions, the list of documents is exactly the same for the construction of a hydroelectric power dam. How's that going to work? Clearly it's not. But the World Bank's really grappling with this, and I speak on the development side of the fence here. We're told, be more flexible, innovate, do these things, but don't run any risks. What happens? As soon as there's a scandal, the World Bank board or the UN people are screaming at us. And I was just reminded of this last week. I was at my kids' school. There's a huge, great poster on the wall. Mistakes are proof we're trying. And if I would like to say anything, I'd like to say we've got to tackle the question of risk aversion. Mistakes don't mean corruption. Mistakes don't mean incompetence. Mistakes are mistakes. They are proof we're trying to do something new. But our procurement system does not allow for mistakes. And who was it yesterday? Isabel, I think, was saying she is personally, financially liable in Portugal for mistakes. Well, then you can kiss goodbye to any innovation. Because if it's my personal neck that's on the line for trying to innovate, no thanks, I'll buy IBM. The incentive structure is totally wrong. There's fantastic solutions out there. But I wouldn't. If I was a procurement official, I wouldn't touch with a barge pole. We have to, and that's what we have to tackle on the development side. And it's not just the World Bank and the UN being completely reputational risk averse. If you're trying to encourage participants in World Bank bidding, they say, we don't want to use the local country system. We want to use the World Bank system. First, because we don't want to learn everybody's system. And secondly, because we then know that the bank will crush as much risk out of the system as possible. So they've got all of these different stakeholders saying, innovate, innovate, innovate. Oh, but please, gently, or please, just not if I'm going to be at risk. So that's what I really want to emphasize to everybody today. We need to rethink the incentive structure. The benefits are public, the risks are all on these poor procurement officials. How many people in here are procurement officials with nothing much to do, all day to do it in, loads of time to get everything perfect? It doesn't happen, does it? We're asking you to do too much. You've got to avoid corruption, you've got to innovate, you've got 1,001 policy objectives you've got to implement, don't make any mistakes. Oh, do some research and find out what the best thing is in the market. Talk to the right people. Oh, can you save money while you're doing it because we're reducing your budget? These things will not lead to innovation. And clearly there are projects where we need to be very risk aware. But I feel it's a bit like an investment portfolio. What we need is a group of safe projects, and maybe we need, a bit like Gio was saying, we need to think about an area like you might have in your investment portfolio where you're willing to take some risk. And in Scotland, they've been looking at doing something about, they call it I can't remember what they call it, it's a PSP, I think it is. Don't ask me what the PSP stands for. But they actually got a political champion. They had some pilots for getting innovative companies in, working with the government in local level. And they said, right, we want you to come in, we want to work with you. And they found several things. Obviously, there's cultural change. It takes much longer than you think. It's expensive. But nothing was going to happen until they had what they called a public sector champion. And they actually had somebody who was a politician who was willing to stand up and say, I'm going to take some risks here for this benefit. Now, they're small, but I really, really would recommend from the policy side that we need to start doing that. Identify some areas where we're going to say we're having a different risk profile from the standard. And then all the rest can flow. But until we tackle that problem, I don't think it matters at all what we do with the tools in terms of making tools available, because nobody's going to use them. Thank you very much.